Okay, I think we're at quarter after now. We will have the
Yes.
recording available, and we'll turn that around quickly so people that weren't able to find their way in or stay will be able to watch that. So let's take a quick pause, and then Julian, I guess you're going to kick things off from there.
I am, yes. And well, good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from. Very nice to see some familiar names on the call. And we'll be kicking off our webinar now on people search using out-of-box or open source components. My name's Julian Mills. I'm Vice President with Extranet User Manager. Very excited to introduce the topic and our speaker. Just a quick note on Teams etiquette. Please do remember to keep yourself on mute. We do want to hear your questions though, so please make sure to raise your hand towards the end, or you can put your questions into chat. So as I said, real pleasure to introduce the topic today. I think for a lot of people, you're aware that really good people search on an intranet or a portal is something we've been talking about for a couple decades. And to the extent that there may even be some cynicism about if it's even possible. And today's topic is a really exciting one for me. I've personally been involved in trying to get people search to work over the years. And some of the developments we're seeing, especially through the Microsoft stack, is making it much, much easier. And so this is where Peter's going to step in. A lot of you are Peter's familiar to you. He's a 13-time MVP, and the presentation he's delivering, he actually got to road test at EduCon in Chicago last week. And Peter, even as we were prepping, I think you were reminiscing about the first time you heard about people trying to make people search it. I think it was at an engineering company.
No, Canadian Tire, actually.
Oh, Canadian Tire. There you go.
I actually have the case study in the deck, so we're going to do a blast from the past going back 15 plus years.
Yeah, so without further ado, Peter's going to call on his experience and then also give you updates on the latest and greatest technology to make people search work.
Cool. Thanks, Julian. Yeah, so we're going to keep it to the hour block that I think we had originally. So I'll deliver it within the sort of 45 minutes through here. As I mentioned, we do have the recording available, so you can always come back, and if colleagues are interested or wanted to join, weren't able to, they'll be able to do that. We'll start just background around the importance of people search and harnessing the employee's expertise, why that's important to every organization today, and then how do you go from there to building a trusted repository of people information? What does that mean? I will touch on Enter ID. Spoiler alert, that's the new name for Azure Active Directory, where a lot of the people search in Microsoft 365 is focused. And then we'll go into what you can do out of the box. What does Microsoft provide out of the box in Microsoft 365? What are some open source options to consider, and what are commercial options? We actually have a fairly extensive list of different commercial options available as part of this as well. Some new news, some things from Microsoft around Viva Skills and LinkedIn Learning. May not be aware, a decade ago, Microsoft paid, I don't know, $45 billion or some very large number to purchase LinkedIn. And we're starting to see some of those integrations start to happen and bringing skills into the organization. Going to kind of sprinkle applications and demo throughout as well. So it won't be all slides and then all demo. It'll be sort of interactive from that point of view. So let's start with the business case. What is it about people search that makes it important to an organization? And it's really recognizing that people are a massive source of the intellectual property of an organization. Yes, you've got structured and unstructured documents that may be in different repositories, could be in Microsoft 365 and Teams and SharePoint, things like that. And that's absolutely part of your organization's intellectual property. But a big part is actually up in people's brains, and the people that are part of your organization are a massive asset, and particularly as you get into bigger organizations. I mean, if you're a handful of people, you kind of know what everybody knows and who the experts are. We're 24 people, so we're not a big organization, but even so, don't necessarily know the deep details of what everybody does. I mean, we've got somebody on the QA team that I just found out yesterday has a development background, and she's writing automated test cases and such for our products. That's a skill that I didn't know we had from that perspective. So it's important to tap into that, and certainly as you get into bigger organizations, Julian was internal intranet focused at some very, very large enterprises here in Canada, where this was massively important. You get into thousands of employees, and it becomes really important to know who's the expert in what from that perspective. And it's always been a challenge to pull that together. And then post-COVID, sure, lots of employers are trying to get employees back into the office. We've given up. We just terminated our lease and said, hey, we're going to be fully remote. We still get together at least once every 2 weeks in person from a physical point of view. But for the most part, we're not that different than most other organizations that predominantly the work is happening remotely. And particularly as you're onboarding new people, how do they understand the organization that they're coming into and who's who and such from that point of view? And then, of course, silos of knowledge, that knowledge may remain isolated and people may not be aware of it, and that they actually have that expertise within their own organization. They don't need to have to go outside of it from that perspective. So it's super important. And unfortunately, as Julian mentioned, it often hasn't been done well from that perspective. This great quote from Lou Platt, former CEO of HP: if only HP knew what HP knows, we'd be 3 times more productive. There's so much tacit knowledge in people's heads. It's not explicit, it's not written down, it's not in documents. Generally accepted, only about 20% of a corporation's knowledge is well documented and accessible. Yeah, search is important in general. How do I do document search and search all of that structured documentation and content in the organization? But a vast amount of it is not even there. It's up in people's heads. So being able to find those people is super important from that perspective. So then we get into why is this a problem that for decades people have been trying to solve and haven't done a great job of solving it? And one of it is just people's data is all over, and there's no system of record. There's no source of truth from that point of view. Maybe you have an HRIS, an information system for HR, and there's a repository there that's likely up to date, or your ERP or your payroll. I mean, one good measure of your employees' information is what's on their pay stub and what's their personal information from that point of view. Because if they're not getting a paycheck, they're not going to be working for you for long from that point of view. And if they're no longer getting a paycheck, they're probably no longer work for you. But the problem is that information often doesn't make it into other places. IT has its own repository, on-premises Active Directory, now Enter ID, which is the Azure Active Directory in the cloud. But there's LinkedIn data. You probably have some Excel spreadsheets. There's other spots from that point of view. And you may have silos that different parts of the organization track different pieces of information around the people that work in your organization. So how connected are those systems? Is there a single place that consolidates all of that? Also important, your onboarding, offboarding, role change processes. As you onboard a new person, do all those different places get updated? And does that all work? And if somebody offboards or changes role, does that get reflected so that ultimately that people search is going to be current and up to date from that perspective? Things like profile pictures, back in the day, often we had ID badges that, we badged into the physical office space that had a, security took your picture on the badge, and that still exists for a lot of organizations. People often don't like those pictures. The one that they showed up for in the security office is maybe not what they want to use for their profile picture. So how do you manage that? Do you do a staff day where you bring in a professional photographer and you do headshots? I'm looking at Amanda's headshot and Logan's as well, I think, and mine. If mine was up in Teams, we actually did that about 5-6 years ago. Brought in a photographer and did proper commercial headshots for everybody. But it's maybe time to update those and get new staff and do that from that point of view. But then things like expertise and skills, like who defines that? Do people self-identify that? And if they do, where do they put it? And do they actually put it there? Because there's not a lot of motivation for you to define your own expertise and skills, because it's not going to help you in your job. It's going to help somebody else in their job. So there's this challenge of the commons that nobody wants to contribute to the commons because their contribution doesn't help them. But if enough people contribute, it's actually useful. So how do we address that from that perspective? So those are some of the challenges, and like I said, these have been around for a very long time, and they still exist today for a lot of organizations. So I mean, the first step is just identifying those sources of information. Where are all of your repositories? What systems do you have in place? And which of those systems is maybe the most primary? Often it's the HRIS or the payroll system, because like I said, that's a super important one. People like to be paid to show up to work. Hopefully they like what they do as well, but that's a big part of the reason that people show up. And what are the current processes for keeping those systems in sync? are those highly manual? And that's going to cause friction and delays, or is there automation around that? There's cool stuff like Power Automate from Microsoft and Logic Apps that you can build these integrations, very low code to keep those different systems in sync with each other. Maybe Entra ID or Azure Active Directory isn't your primary system of record, but if you want to light all this stuff up in Microsoft 365, it needs to be up to date. And if that's a very manual process, it probably isn't up to date. And we see that with a lot of organizations. Ours is no different. We just started a cleanup process recently on our Entra ID because we had way too much junk in there and old groups and people that were deactivated but really should be removed and all that side of the house. So there is some housekeeping that needs to happen, and it's often IT and HR are probably the two primary departments involved in that, but not the only ones from that perspective. So you've heard me mention Entra ID a couple of times. So Entra, if you're not aware, is this new name for a suite of identity and access products from Microsoft. So think of Entra ID as basically the old Azure Active Directory, and it lives inside this bigger product bucket called Entra from Microsoft. So there's things like ID governance and external IDs and verified IDs, permissions management that are also part of the Entra family. But Entra ID is predominantly what we're going to focus on here today. It hasn't fundamentally changed. There's a new portal, but there's still the old one. So typical Microsoft, they give you, multiple confusing ways to do the same thing, and they change names of products just willy-nilly. But that's Microsoft. We have to roll with it from that point of view. So, what are the consequences of not integrating your systems? I mean, these are kind of true for a lot of different scenarios, not just people search, but garbage in, garbage out. You're not going to be making accurate decisions. There's a productivity hit because you're not going to be able to find the people that can really help you in the way that you need to. There's a loss of trust. If you try and use tools that give you inaccurate data, you're going to give up on them. You say, hey, I don't trust that. It doesn't work well. So operational costs and data security are going to be impacted from that point of view. So I said I was going to do a blast from the past. This is a screenshot of the shiny new MOS 2007. For those of you who remember the SharePoint on-premise days, that was the 2007 launch of SharePoint Server, and the IntireNet, which was the brand name for the intranet at Canadian Tire. If folks on the call are Canadian, they immediately recognize that brand. If you're from the US or elsewhere, you may not recognize, but it's a very iconic Canadian brand, probably up there with Tim Hortons in terms of sort of recognition across the country from that perspective. And, they were launching a new intranet. We were doing a migration from Lotus Notes into SharePoint on-premises, and one of the things they said was, search was broken on the old intranet. We just wanted search that worked, and people search was actually super important. I mean, this was not for the entire retail organization. Canadian Tire is a franchise dealer-owned organization, so there's about 50,000 staff that work for the retailers in the stores, but they're not employees of the corporate head office, which is actually a family-controlled, publicly traded company. There's about 3,000 people that work for that corporate entity. And that's the target for this IntireNet here, was those 3,000 people. So how do we find the different people? And things like people search was super important. Even dealer search, being able to find the dealers and their staff and such was part of it as well. But there was no single source of the truth. So this is an old data diagram from the project back 15, 16 years ago. Actually hasn't changed a whole lot probably than what it might look like today. And it wasn't Azure Active Directory or Entra ID, it was on-premise Active Directory, but kind of think of that as the same thing from that perspective. They obviously had an HRIS system. They're a large publicly traded company, so that was definitely input from that point of view. They also had a facilities database, so everybody got assigned cubes in the different office buildings that they had, predominantly around the Greater Toronto area. And facilities was the keeper of who's at where and who had what desk. There's one that's not on this diagram that we had to pull in as well, which was the telco database. So there was a whole other part of IT that was responsible for telecommunications and phone systems. This is before VoIP and everything else. So who got what phone number and where was that assigned? There was the dealer data of all the dealer people and such from that point of view. And basically what we did was built a data warehouse to say, hey, let's pull all that into a data warehouse that we can then surface up in the intranet site and make that available. So pulling data from all of these different sources. It was it was too hard to say, hey, let's actually, build the process to automate and update the different systems from each other from that perspective. That was a bigger project that wasn't part of our mandate. As we said, let's just pull it and grab the sources of truth for the different elements of profile data to gather into that data warehouse. If I was to do this project today, I would use something like Logic Apps for enterprise integrations to say, hey, let's build the automations that when somebody gets onboarded in the HRIS, we know that they need an account and automate that account and push that profile data across. And when facilities assigns them a desk, push that into Active Directory. So this becomes our data warehouse effectively here. And that's really where your end goal should be, ideally from that perspective. So, even though it's approaching 2 decades old, a lot of the same pain points and a lot of the same stories from that point of view. So, streamlining and integrating your systems should be part of that. You can light up people search with some of the stuff I'm going to be showing you out of the box or with open source very easily. But if your data that's pointing to, if your enter ID data is not correct and current, then it's not going to be trustworthy and it's not a good solution. You do need to spend the time to tidy up from this point of view. So basically saying, hey, enter ID should be the source of truth, and any other systems need to feed into that and keep that current from that point of view. But then assuming that we've got that, what do we do with it? How do we actually leverage that and do something? And we've got this fun little diagram of Cepheus pushing the rock up the hill every day, and it rolls down at the end of the day, and you just feel like you don't get ahead from that point of view. But it is doable. It can be achieved, and having up-to-date and accurate people information is super important, and it should be part of any organization's intranet from that perspective. And if your organization is using Microsoft 365, then that's the obvious place to surface that up. So what are some of the things that we can do just out of the box with Microsoft 365? There's actually a fair bit out of the box that you have available to us. Certain solutions are already there. There's Microsoft Search, there's people cards, there's web parts for both people and org charts, and there's Microsoft Delve. And we're going to delve, no pun intended, into each of those and explore those. So let's actually start with Microsoft Search. So for those of you not familiar, here, let me just come up to the homepage of our intranet. Ignore the people search down here. We'll get to that one in a minute. But I'm at the top level communications site for our Envision IT organization. Yes, we're only 24 people. We've got lots of stuff in here, including people as part of this. So if I want to start typing in here, and let's say I type Logan's name in, who's our VP Sales that's on the call here. Microsoft Search is this vision of providing a unified search experience wherever you are, whether you're in SharePoint like I am right now, ideally in Teams. They're not there on the Teams side yet. I'll come back to that. But if I'm in my Windows 11 and just bring up my start bar, if I'm using Bing Enterprise Search, or I'm in PowerPoint, Word, Excel, they all have a search box at the top. And the idea is to have a consistent experience across all that. This is a vision they've been working on for quite a number of years right now. It's actually really starting to come together, which is nice. So when I type Logan's name in, at this point, Microsoft Search doesn't know that I'm looking for a person. It's just bringing up options from there to say, hey, we've got some people here, we've got some files. I can hit enter on that to actually execute that search and bring the search back. And it decided, hey, I'm going to bring Logan's card up as the top item from a search point of view, because you're probably looking for him as a person. Maybe I want to review his commissions or his expenses. We won't dive into those documents. I never know when I do a live search or delve demo what I'm actually going to have coming up as part of this. Actually like this card in Microsoft Search the best, and for some reason, I mean, they're standardizing the people cards so they appear the same in all the places. This one's a little bit different. It actually provides some calendar information, which is super useful to say, hey, what's Logan got going on? Oh, he's free at lunchtime. Maybe we can connect up through there. Because a big part of people search is I want to find somebody so I can actually talk to them. I want to give them a call. I want to do a Teams call. I want to chat them. I want to send them an email, whatever the case may be. And being able to see that is super useful. I mean, Logan has shared his calendar with me, so I can actually see the details. But even if he hadn't, I would at least see his availability through here as part of that. But I can come back to the overview. I can say, hey, I'd like to send him an email, or I want to do a Teams chat with him, or I want to phone him. Where is he physically located? Who does he report to? What recent things have we been working on from that point of view? And I can dive deeper into the organization through here to see, hey, Logan reports to me. Here's some of my other direct reports. Here are the direct reports that Logan has. You can actually navigate the organization structure right in the people card from that point of view. And that's super important too. You don't want to just find people. You want to find out, how do they connect to you? How do they relate to you? Where do they fit into the organization from a reporting structure perspective? And that's a really important thing to keep in Entra ID or Azure Active Directory is what is the manager for each person in your organization? Because you don't have to go build these org charts. All you have to do is tell Microsoft 365 who reports to who, and it'll build the org charts on the fly for you. And if that changes, it updates and changes as part of that. So it's very easy to manage that. It's also important for other purposes. I mean, we do a lot of workflows and automation. We use both Power Automate and Logic apps to do those. And if Logan was submitting that expense report, who needs to approve it? Well, just go look at the manager structure. Oh, that comes to Peter, and I get the notification to approve that. Same thing with vacation requests and such. So it's a really important property to get right in your organization. It doesn't deal with dotted lines and things like that, but from an explicit direct report point of view, it works really well. And that's one of the challenges of both when we come in to talk about people search or we talk about workflows and approvals, making sure that is correct in your Entra ID. And then you've got the process to keep it correct, that as roles change and people changed and people got onboarded, offboarded, that gets updated and reflected as part of that. I can see his recent files that he's working on, groups that he belongs to and such from that perspective. So there's a fair bit of detail there from that perspective. Now, if I was in Teams as an alternative, let me just come over to my Teams window here for a sec, and pull that across. We see people that we're collaborating with on chats in here. Like I've got Logan in this Teams chat on a pro bono project that we're working on. So I can hover over his name there. I can actually see his status. So I see he's green and available. Odd because he's in a meeting right now, but nevertheless, as far as it's concerned, he is available and free at 11:45. And I can do all the same things. I can chat with him. I can see his org chart. I can do a video call or a phone call with them. This actually lights up the LinkedIn connection as well. When I was doing my dry run for my Chicago version of this talk last week, I clicked on that link and it was actually taking me to a completely different Logan guest who wasn't our Logan that works from that point of view. So I did have the ability to say, hey, that's not the right one, and connected them up from there. But who should be responsible for that? Is that something that actually should be part of your central profile that's managed on behalf? LinkedIn has become so important to us from a marketing point of view, and making sure all of our staff are set up properly on that and managed as part of that as well. So we're starting to see some more LinkedIn connections come through as part of that integration between Microsoft 365 and LinkedIn. I think Microsoft's being a little cautious. They don't want to overstep privacy boundaries, even though it's one, top level company, Microsoft Corp, that owns it all. They don't want to be seen as taking unfair advantage and dipping into that private data. Although a lot of LinkedIn is available publicly from that point of view, and I'll talk more on that in a bit. Or if I was in my Outlook, and I popped up a new email and said, hey, I want to send an email to Logan, that same people card is going to come up in there. And all those same options that I was seeing in Teams. So what I saw in Teams and what I see in Outlook are very consistent from that point of view. In fact, if I'm over in SharePoint and I come to, say, just a SharePoint library that has different people's names on them through here, if I was to hover over Amanda, I get her small people card. Once I sit there for a second, her bigger one pops open from there, and I see that same experience there. So Microsoft's done a really nice job of these people cards to say, hey, wherever identity shows up, whether it's in your Teams chat or your email or your SharePoint library or other spots in Microsoft. Important thing is make sure that data is right. If it's not consistent and right, people aren't going to trust it, and it's not useful to the organization. So that's sort of job number one from that point of view. But then let's have a look at what you can do beyond that. So if I come here, this is just a simple communications page that I created in our site for demo purposes. Say, hey, what are the web parts that I can drop onto a page in SharePoint to expose people information? Take, for example, maybe this was a department landing page in our intranet, and we wanted to list kind of key contact people in that department on there. Yes, you could just author that content onto the page, but it's actually nicer to use a web part like this one here. So if I come in and edit this page in SharePoint, I can click on that web part, and I get this little editor here that I can edit properties of that web part. How do I want it laid out? Do I want small people, medium people, large people, what have you through there? But it's really simple to add additional people. If I wanted to put Amanda into this list, I just start typing her name, finds her in the list, and boom, she's added in as part of that. And if I publish this page, that's now up to date. Now, if this was a department landing page, I mean, this isn't automated to say, hey, when the members of the department change, the people that show up here change as part of that. You have to manually update those. But everybody's contact information, what their job role is, all those sorts of details does automatically just come across for free as part of that. And when I hover over somebody, I'm getting that same people card experience from that perspective. So that's sort of number one. And if you don't have that web part on a page, I should have, let me just not change that just yet. Basically, if you haven't worked with modern communication pages, when you've got a page layout like this and you want to put some content into it, I can just click on this plus here anywhere within the page that I want to put that part in. And the easiest thing is to actually use the search here and say, hey, I just want to do a people component here and drop that people in there. Now we've got a couple of different web parts, both commercial and open source, that we're going to talk about in addition to that, but that's one option that everybody gets. It's there out of the box in Microsoft 365. In fact, if I come further down in the page here, there's also an organizational web part. So that same org structure that I was showing you in Logan's people card, you can actually embed it onto a page. And this one's a little more dynamic because it will use the reporting structure. So you could say, hey, if this was a department level page, you could pick the director of that department as the top node on the org chart that you wanted to put in on the page, and it will use the reporting structure to then spill that out from there and say, okay, who are all the people underneath from that perspective? Light them up in the web part from there. And again, this is a free one that's included as part of your Microsoft 365. It's there already in the box, and there's not really much you need to do other than just drop it in and decide how you want to configure it. So again, I can come to edit this web part, and really the only control I have is, how deep do I want that org chart to go? Maybe I only want to show the top two levels of department, for example. I could put number 2 in there and say, hey, we'll restrict it at that level. So those are some of the out of the box comes with Microsoft components that we've got available for us. But let's actually switch gears for a second. There's this other piece. Actually, I need to discard my changes so I don't forget. So yes, I'll say okay that time. If you come up into your app launcher, we call it the waffle up here in the left corner of your Microsoft 365, you get all the different apps that have been turned on for your organization. And one of the ones that you may or may not see in here is Delve. And Delve is basically a people in knowledge discovery. So this is my homepage, and Delve is kind of all about me. I can look at somebody else's from that perspective as well and see, what are recent documents that person is working on. Now, Delve often freaks senior leadership out because they think, oh my goodness, like people can come to this page of mine as CEO and see everything that I'm working on and stuff they're not supposed to see. It is always security trim. So you only ever see what you're already allowed to see. I think they should put this in like 24-point font to say, hey, don't panic. Others will only see documents they have access to. And there's a link here about why you can trust Delve. Most people miss that, and they often go into panic mode to say, we need to turn this off. And you'll find orgs that just say, hey, Delve is turned off for our organization. We don't want to expose it because people are seeing things that they're not supposed to see. And it may be true that they are seeing things that they're not supposed to see, but the reason they're seeing them is not because you have Delve turned on. It's because you've done a poor job of implementing your security, and you've got some super secret documents that people aren't supposed to see in a place that everybody's allowed to see them. And maybe they were so buried down, in 20 folders deep that nobody knew it was there, and Delve surfaced it up. But the root problem is fix your security and have the right information protection around your documents as part of that. But unfortunately, a lot of orgs have decided, no, let's just turn Delve off. And Microsoft's recognized that. They've kind of downplayed Delve over the last couple of years. It was a big deal when it first came out, and they don't really talk about it that much anymore. But basically what they've done in Delve with the org structure and the availability calendar and the related documents, they're surfacing that up in the people card. So it's a more subtle, constrained way of seeing it from that point of view, but it's actually the same content. It's all using the Microsoft Graph, which is this collection of signals of how people work together in your organization that Microsoft themselves aren't allowed to look at. This is all private to your organization. But if you have rights to that content because you work with that person and you work on that document, then it will expose it up to you as part of that. So, I mean, I can click over to Logan to see his Delve page and get a sense of, what he's working on, where he fits in the organization, related people, and such from that point of view. But if I come back to the me here, I actually have the ability to update my profile. And Delve is actually one of the easier spots to manage this information. Maybe I don't like that headshot that I've got in there. I can click on the camera icon there, and it'll actually take me through a process of, allowing me to edit my details and change my photo and do all that from that point of view. It's not super friendly from that point of view, but it works. And if I come back to Delve, I can also update my profile through this link here. This one's a little friendlier. I can add my birthday or my home phone number and write some stuff about me and my projects and my skills and expertise, which is awesome. But the problem is nobody ever does this. I mean, mine's all empty and I'm not different than anybody else from that point of view. So having people self-identify this information is often not the right approach. But those are all things that you have available out of the box. Now, if I come down here a little bit further, I said I'd come back to this one here. This web part is not available out of the box, but is a freely available open source web part. Fellow MVP in Belgium, I think, created it, and we love it. We use it on a bunch of our client projects. I mean, we've got sort of a paging view, and when I hover over somebody, I see that exact same people card experience. So it's actually using the out of the box experience from that point of view. But if I'm looking for somebody, I can type in a name and have it filter down those results and say, hey, that's who I'm looking for, get to their card and go in from there. So it's super easy to set up. And when you edit this web part, you can put some constraints around that to say, hey, I want to filter people based on their department or different properties they have as a user profile property. So you can actually have versions of that web part in different parts of your intranet that represent different parts of your organization, or you could have an all up everybody version of it that shows all staff. But you can filter it like we filter ours to say, hey, they need to have a company of Envision IT, and they have to have an employee number, and they have to be an active account in our Microsoft 365, and then they show up because they must be a staff at that point. So you have to define those rules and build that out from that perspective. So those are some different things from an out of the box point of view. There is another one that I had here on my demo. This is a PNP, which is a Microsoft supported patterns and practices open source project. A lot of cool stuff in there for lots of different things. This web part I find a little limiting because it shows everything, including system administrator accounts and admin accounts and such that you don't really want to show in your people search. Even guests show up in here, and you can't filter down and constrain it. So it's not super useful from that perspective. I'm a much bigger fan of this one here from that perspective. But let me switch back to Deck here for a minute. I just want to talk about some of the other broader options from there. So we've gone through the people cards. I'm going to skip through these ones. They're more there for people that are just looking at the deck. This is the open source one that I like, that I recommended. So the link to GitHub, which is an open source repository, is there. You can pull that down and deploy it into your intranet quite easily and get that up and running for yourself. You can configure it. I mean, we worked with Niagara Regional Police, which is one of our clients, to say, hey, we want things like badge numbers showing up and rank right on this view here. So you can actually tweak it and modify it because they provide all the source code as part of that GitHub repo and make it do exactly what you want from that perspective. But then there's a whole bunch of commercial products, and this is probably not an exhaustive list. I did a bunch of Google searching. I put some LinkedIn posts out to say, hey, who knows of anything else? And this is basically where I came to from that point of view. These are all for-fee add-ons to Microsoft 365. I mean, LiveTiles came out of a company called Hyperfish. They got acquired by LiveTiles a number of years ago. They had a cool concept, which wasn't just the directory. I mean, yes, there is a nice directory search and org chart and people card honestly, I'm kind of a fan now of just using the out-of-the-box people card from Microsoft because it's sort of evolving and staying current from that point of view. But they had this concept of how do we encourage people to update their profiles, and they basically had an agent that would run and say, hey, I'm not going to ask you for everything because you're not going to give me everything, but could you just upload your profile picture because I noticed you don't have one, and they'd make it a very easy process for you to do one or two things, and then a few weeks later they might ask for a few more things. So it was sort of a slow trickle way of building out the profiles from that point of view. So I did like the concept from that perspective. Unfortunately, like most of these vendors, they don't publish their pricing, so I can't share any sort of context of how cheap or expensive it is. I'm assuming they're all priced based on the number of employees that you have in your organization. But some of the others, there's Atlanta is another directory, similar sort of idea. I'm assuming you can probably customize your search from this point of view. They did publish their pricing, so it depends on the number of employees, sort of starting from $100 a month up to $1,000 a month for up to 10,000 employees, and then I guess they get a custom pricing from there, which makes perfect sense. So it gives you a sense of what commercial solutions may cost you from that point of view. There's Cloudwell is another one. I mean, you'll see a common theme of search box and cards. Some of them are maybe not super modern looking because I think these were built some time ago and maybe haven't kept up to modern design standards. I honestly like the open source better than a number of these, but it's up to you to have a look at these from that point of view. Atlas looks a little more modern and current from that perspective. I mean, some of them have built them as Teams apps as well, so you can either pin them as a pin in a channel, or others, you can actually pin on the left bar here as a high level perspective from that point of view. So it's nice being able to be right in Teams and be able to navigate that. The SharePoint Framework one, the open source one that I was pushing at the beginning, I actually haven't explored. Can we pin it as a Teams app? Because the way it's built, it should be either already supported in Teams or very easy to do that. So that's something we should look at to see, hey, what can we do with that? Bitextra has some pricing, $500 a year. That's actually quite reasonable from that point of view. I don't know if they have any limits on how many people you do with that. Who's this one? HR365, again, as a Teams app that's actually pinned on the left bar here. So that's interesting. And they did publish up their pricing. So again, sort of varies between 50 and 250 per month, up to 300 users, and then they've got some add-on pricing from there to say, hey, what's the cost for additional staff? I mean, this one from Beyond Intranet looks pretty old school. I don't know how long it's been since it was last updated. So, I mean, the links are all there. Have a look, check them out, and see what makes sense from that point of view. But let's switch gears a little bit and talk a bit about what Microsoft is doing from a Viva Skills and a LinkedIn Learning point of view. So I mentioned the Microsoft Graph. It's this ability to see all the interactions that are happening in your Microsoft 365 tenant. And it's private to your organization, and people only see what they're allowed to see from that point of view as well. There's a graph on the LinkedIn side as well, and there's all that activity happening on LinkedIn from a public point of view. What they're doing is pulling those two data sources together into what they're calling the Viva Skills Graph and using it to drive experiences in Microsoft 365 as well as from a Microsoft Viva point of view. So there's a couple of articles here on what's happening from that point of view. So it's quite interesting. It's very early days. These announcements only came out a couple of weeks ago from that point of view. And it's not about diving deep into individual people and finding that one expert in your organization. They're staying very aggregate, and they're looking at it more from a dashboard point of view to say, how's your org doing from a skills perspective? Where do you need to invest from a learning and development and training point of view? Which kind of feeds into some of the other Viva side of things, like Viva Learning and such from that perspective. So, it's a start. I think there's a lot more that can happen with LinkedIn in particular. So I started looking at what we're doing. So I mean, we've now cut the cord to our on-premises Active Directory, and we just have our Enter ID repository as an organization now. And I thought, well, what are some of the things that we could pull in from a data source point of view? LinkedIn is an obvious one that we know the LinkedIn profiles for all of our staff. we can actually scrape that data and bring it into our people search. You might say, hey, hang on, that probably violates the terms of services of LinkedIn. LinkedIn has tried to enforce that and say, no, you're not allowed to do that, but they failed. They've lost court cases, even for people that want to leverage that content they scrape commercially for other purposes. And we're not talking about doing that. We're trying to use it internally for those people's benefits themselves. And I think that can be a great way if your staff are predominantly knowledge workers, they're probably up to date on LinkedIn. That's a great place to go to find out, hey, what was their past experience and roles and things like that? Could we make that as part of people search? Learning and development is another big part. So LMS 365 is a great partner of ours that has a learning management solution built on 365. And they have a whole data warehouse and Power BI reports around, pulling that learning data out of courses. Now, there is some privacy stuff there. We'd have to say, well, which courses are appropriate for anybody to be able to discover who's taken that and has that learning, and maybe which ones aren't. But assuming that we can cross that sort of legal hurdle, pulling that data in makes a ton of sense as well. I was even looked at our time tracking software. It's a home built several decades ago. We called it Splat back in the day. And it's where all of our staff track every hour that they work and what they're working on and notes and things like that. There's 216,000 unique notes that have been written by my team and predecessors over the last 2 decades. There's a lot of knowledge there. Could we feed that in? And the reason I put Extranet User Manager, which is our product, which isn't about people search, in there, is that we're doing a lot of investments in the product around cognitive search and AI, where we're able to now harvest all the Enter ID data and feed it into cognitive search to make the search here work better. And we're realizing that has a lot of value, not just for the external scenario, but even for internal people search as well, because we could ingest LinkedIn profile data, LMS data, other system data into that cognitive search and light it up as part of that people search. And we've actually published some of this up. So if you go to our public website now, it's actually built on our Extranet User Manager product as well as being about it. So if I come to this page here, and you'll find it under the About Staff directory on our public site, we've decided to publish full bios for all of our staff on the site. So, I can click into Aaron as one of our developers and see his background and details from there. He has the ability to self-edit this and update his profile from there. We have everybody's LinkedIn profile connected there. We haven't started harvesting that LinkedIn data yet, but that's sort of a next step of where we want to go from that point of view. And things like job titles and names, we can search from here. It's a very simple search. It's not using cognitive search yet on this version here. We actually used it for a conference that we ran. We didn't run. We were partnering with Debbie Ireland here in the center, down in both Auckland, New Zealand, and Melbourne, Australia. And this site here is her previous year's conference that we ran this under. I can actually come into things like the speakers directory and do that same sort of people search in here and say, hey, I'm looking for Peter. Oh, there he is. And each speaker could update their own bio information in there. They could tag what events they're in, even the exhibitors tied in as part of that. So exhibitors could have bios on there. People could opt in if they registered to put their own profile in and kind of build this online community to connect people together from that point of view. So this whole people search idea isn't just unique to the internal staff, it applies outside of the organization too. And we're doing this with a number of clients of ours. MBN Canada is Municipal Benchmarking Network. So they have members of their association are large municipalities in Canada, and they run 80 plus different expert panels and boards and committees with membership from all of these different municipalities across Canada. So connecting those people up, finding experts across that is a big part of that. Same thing with Electricity Canada. Their members are the large utility companies and power generation companies across Canada. And again, there's a lot of knowledge sharing that can happen, best practices between the organizations. That's why they belong to the association. So people search is very important to both of those. So you can't get into the people search part of those without being a member, but that side of it is there. And the ability for people to self-manage their profile and update it, kind of like what I showed you in Delve, but we provided a simpler, sort of friendlier, more modern experience around that. In fact, kind of early preview stuff here, we're starting to build out people search, as I mentioned, using cognitive search. So this is still in development. It's not part of the released version of Extranet User Manager, but it's actually live using cognitive search. So, I mean, if I'm looking here and as I'm typing, each keystroke that I'm pressing is actually doing another call out to cognitive search. it takes like 100 milliseconds to search hundreds or thousands of people data and pulling that information up quickly, and then I can get to profile pages from there. But the cool thing is, like, let's say, oh, I signed out. Let me just sign back in again here. Let's say I was looking for a particular expert. Now we've actually populated this directory with a whole bunch of made up people. Like Abigail and Adrian don't work for Extranet User Manager. They're actually ChatGPT generated names and job titles, and Faces AI generated images. Even the pictures aren't real people from that point of view. And we've got hundreds of different roles we've created to kind of flesh out this people search idea. What we haven't done yet is actually had ChatGPT generate full bios and backgrounds for each of those people. That's sort of a next step that we want to go on that. But if I come back to the directory for a sec here, whoops, went too far. And I'm looking for a particular expert. Oh, my page is going to crash and burn right at noon here. Okay, there we go. So let's say I'm looking for somebody that knows Java. It's something that we do with some of our developments. All these people somewhere in their profiles have mentioned Java as part of that. In fact, if I come back and search for Peter, I was confused. Why did Anisha's name keep coming up when I search for Peter? It's not part of his name. But if I look down in here, he's got Peter Carson's blog site mentioned in his bio information. It's actually searching all that content from that point of view. So you can really enrich that with a lot of content, not force the staff to have to enter it from that point of view, and light that up for everybody in your organization, or even externally to leverage it from that point of view. So I'm going to try and keep to the 12 o'clock stop as much as I can here. I know I can ramble on a bit here, but key takeaways, people are super important from a source of intellectual property, and you got to make it easy to discover and amplify that experience. So people search is a big part of that, but the quality is directly proportional to the quality of your data. And forcing people to do that themselves is not going to work. You got to automate that and figure that out. We've got some other resources in here as part of that. I didn't pause to take a breath to say, hey, were there questions in the chat? I'm not sure if there were, but if not, we can always follow up through email afterwards, and happy to answer questions from that point of view. So want to be respectful. Apologies on the late delay and the confusion getting started for those of you who were able to join. Thank you very much, and have a great rest of your day.